What happens when the world's smartest man loses everything? The gala was extravagant, as most things in Hollywood are, but this time there was something missing, a certain energy that had once permeated the air at these elite gatherings. It was supposed to be a celebration, a toast to success, to wealth, and to power. But there was only tension. Elon Musk stood near the edge of the grand ballroom, his dark suit feeling more like a costume than something he'd worn just months ago with confidence. His reputation, once forged by his brilliant mind and daring ventures, was now reduced to jokes. Ridicule. As he sipped from a glass of water, he overheard fragments of conversation about himself. Did you hear? SpaceX is failing. Tesla's shares are tanking. Poor Elon, what does he even have left? The murmurs stung. These weren't the voices of critics or strangers, these were the voices of the same people who had once begged for his insight, admired his innovation, and treated him like a messiah of technology. Now they pitied him. And that pity was sharper than any cutting remark. He wasn't used to being the subject of mockery. It had been years since anyone had dared doubt him. He had made billions, launched rockets into space, transformed electric vehicles from a niche product into a mainstream revolution. He had been untouchable. But now, it felt like the universe itself had conspired to make him ordinary. Nothing left but empty headlines and broken dreams. Then, as if the universe were mocking him further, there she was, Chloe Beaumont. The young heiress. Rich. Beautiful. And above all, smug. She wasn't even trying to hide the amusement on her face when she glanced in his direction. Chloe had always been like that, smiling like the world revolved around her. It was as if she was born with an unshakable belief that nothing could touch her. Is that really Elon Musk? Chloe's voice echoed across the room, laced with sarcasm. Her friends, all well-dressed and clinking champagne glasses, laughed. Elon knew exactly what they were talking about, the world was a game to them, and people like him. They were pawns. Not worthy of the Queen's attention. Chloe, the golden girl of Silicon Valley's high society, was about to take it a step further. She had a talent for making people feel small without even trying. It was her weapon, her gift. And tonight, it was going to be no different. Elon felt the weight of their eyes on him. He could leave. He could walk away and forget about this night. But something about it felt like it would haunt him if he didn't confront it. He was never one to back down. The DJ stopped the music and a spotlight fell on him, as if the universe was pushing him to the center of the stage. A microphone was thrust in his direction, but instead of speaking, Elon simply nodded toward the grand piano at the back of the room. The rich, ornate instrument had always been a place of solace for him, a place to retreat when words failed him. A place where he could think clearly. Chloe, ever the provocateur, tilted her head as she approached. So, Elon, what are you going to do now? You're broke, you've lost it all. How does it feel to be the smartest man in the room and still have nothing? Her voice, dripping with mockery, echoed in his mind. Nothing. It was a word he had heard too many times lately. But he wasn't going to let her win. Not this time. With a single breath, he stood up, walking with a measured pace toward the piano. As the sounds of the ballroom dulled behind him, his fingers hovered over the keys. The moment was tense. The crowd watched. Some leaned forward in their seats, intrigued by what was about to unfold. Chloe's smirk widened, sure that whatever Elon did next would be a disappointment. She had already decided he was a has-been. A washed-up genius. She wasn't expecting much. Nothing, in fact. But when Elon's fingers pressed the first note, the room fell silent. For the briefest moment, everything stopped. It wasn't just a note, it was a statement. It was him, claiming a sliver of his former self. He wasn't finished. Not yet. As his fingers began to move, the melody shifted from hesitant to deliberate. It was raw. Unrefined. But it carried emotion, emotion that was too real for anyone to ignore. The song spoke of failure, of loss, of the weight of the world. But it also spoke of hope. Of defiance. Of the quiet resilience that no one thought he had left. Chloe, whose smirk had been firmly planted just moments ago, stood motionless. Her eyes, once gleaming with amusement, began to flicker with something else, surprise. And maybe, just maybe, a hint of awe. Elon played. The crowd could hear the struggle in each note, each chord an expression of pain and ambition. It was the sound of a man who had been knocked down, time and time again, but refused to stay on the ground. His hands moved like a man possessed. The music filled the room, wrapping itself around the audience like a blanket, pulling them into his world, into his journey. He wasn't just playing the piano, he was opening his soul to them, showing them something more than the headlines and the numbers. He was showing them who he was, beyond the tech mogul, beyond the billionaire. He was human. Chloe's smirk disappeared. It was as if the room itself had swallowed it whole. She was no longer the center of attention, no longer the untouchable queen of the social circle. Now, it was all about him. And she couldn't help but wonder, for the first time, if she had misjudged him. Who was this man? As the last notes echoed through the hall, Elon paused, his fingers lingering over the keys. There was silence, deep, profound silence. And then, a soft clap. One solitary clap. Followed by another. Then a few more. And soon, the entire room was on their feet, applauding, not for his wealth, not for his inventions, but for the man who had, in that one moment, reminded them of the beauty of being human. Elon looked up, meeting Chloe's gaze. She said nothing. There were no words left to say. Instead, Elon smiled, genuine, quiet. He had given them a piece of himself. And in doing so, he had found a part of himself that had been lost for too long. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The applause was brief. Almost like an afterthought, it faded into the hum of murmurs and sidelong glances. But for Elon, it was enough. The music had spoken for him in ways words could not. It was a small victory. A reminder that, even if the world thought him a failure, there was still something within him that no one could take away. He walked away from the piano, his heart racing in the way it always did after he'd poured himself into something. It wasn't the applause that mattered, it was the feeling of creation, of reclaiming a part of himself he hadn't realized he was missing. He hadn't played the piano in years, but tonight, it had been like breathing again. But as the applause died down and the crowd shifted back into their circles of wealth and superficiality, the reality of his life came crashing back. He wasn't the same man who had once built empires, who had revolutionized industries. He wasn't the tech genius anymore, he was the man who had lost it all. Elon had seen it coming, even though he'd fought it with everything he had. Tesla's stock had plummeted after a series of failed launches. SpaceX, once the beacon of hope for private space exploration, had suffered multiple setbacks, leading investors to pull back their support. And Twitter? Well, that was the final straw. The chaos around it, the endless media circus, the battles with the board, he had thought he could juggle everything. But the truth was, he couldn't. He had built empires before. He had watched them crumble and rise again. But this time, the empire was his own. And this time, it felt like there was no coming back. It had all started with a dream. A vision of a future where humanity could survive beyond Earth, where the world ran on clean energy, and where information was free from censorship. The dream had seemed unshakable, unstoppable. But as time passed, the cracks began to show. It wasn't just the financial losses. It was the emotional toll. Elon had always been the man who could look at a problem and solve it. But lately, the problems kept multiplying, and the solutions felt more and more distant. His personal life had fractured. He had thought that if he could build something bigger than himself, maybe it would fill the emptiness he felt inside. But no matter how many rockets he launched or how many cars he electrified, the loneliness lingered. His marriages had failed, one after another. The distance from his children grew. And in the silence of his sprawling, empty houses, the loneliness gnawed at him. In the early days, Elon had been driven by a fierce desire to prove himself, to show the world that he could do the impossible. And in many ways, he had. But now, as the dust settled, the victories felt hollow. The accolades meaningless. The relentless pressure to be perfect had worn him down. And in his weakest moments, when he allowed himself to feel, the overwhelming question surfaced again and again: was it all worth it? The media didn't help. Headlines calling him a genius one day and a failure the next. The world's most famous visionary was now the world's biggest joke. People mocked his ideas, questioned his decisions, and laughed at his missteps. He wasn't just losing money, he was losing himself. That night, after the gala, Elon found himself standing on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out at the city of Los Angeles. The skyline shimmered in the distance, but all he could think about was how it mirrored his life, a glittering facade masking the emptiness within. His phone buzzed, pulling him back into the present. A text from one of his closest friends read, "Elon, we need to talk. We can't keep pretending this is okay." He ran a hand through his hair, the weight of it all pressing on him. He had always prided himself on his ability to move forward, to find the next big challenge and conquer it. But now, it felt like he was just holding on, clinging to the remnants of a life that no longer made sense. He opened his inbox and scrolled through the countless emails from investors, partners, and lawyers. All of them asking for answers, demanding explanations. There were no more grand speeches, no more rallies to build hope. Now, it was just questions. Questions about what had gone wrong, about how to fix it. Elon sat down on the couch, feeling the weight of failure settle over him. It wasn't supposed to be like this. He had built so much, changed the world in so many ways. But now, all of it seemed so fragile, so fleeting. The next morning, Elon woke up to a series of notifications. His assistant had forwarded the media coverage of the gala. The headline read, "Elon Musk strikes back at the gala, is the fallen billionaire making a comeback?" But the article that followed wasn't the kind of comeback story Elon was hoping for. Instead, it was another round of media skepticism. People were fascinated by his piano performance, but they couldn't resist asking, was this a publicity stunt? Was he trying to reinvent himself yet again? For every ounce of hope he had built in that fleeting moment on the piano, the media had torn it down. They couldn't see past the failures. They couldn't see the man who had been knocked down, who had scraped himself off the ground and dared to keep going. But maybe that was the point. Maybe the only way forward was to embrace the fact that he had nothing left. Elon stepped out of his apartment, the weight of the world pressing down on him. His next move was uncertain. But one thing was clear, he wasn't done yet. The day after the gala, Elon stood at the edge of his rooftop, watching the sun begin to dip below the horizon. The vibrant colors of the sky contrasted sharply with the deep emptiness that churned inside him. He had spent the last few hours trying to come to terms with everything, his failures, his mistakes, the mess his life had become. But there was no clarity. Only the hollow echo of what was. The phone buzzed in his pocket, a distraction he didn't want but couldn't ignore. It was a text from Sandy, an old friend and business partner. "Elon, I know things are hard, but this is not the end. Let's talk. Come by the office. We have a few things to discuss." He stared at the message for a few moments, unsure how to respond. Sandy was one of the few people who had stuck by him when things began to unravel. He had been there when Elon's ideas seemed like a long shot, and he had been there when they came to fruition. But this was different now. Elon wasn't the man who had once sparked fires of innovation. He was a shadow of that figure, and the thought of facing anyone from his past made him feel even more like an imposter. Still, something tugged at him, a thread of hope buried beneath the weight of everything else. Maybe Sandy had an answer. Maybe there was a way out of this mess. He left his penthouse in the middle of the afternoon, the streets of Los Angeles bustling as usual, a stark contrast to the turmoil in his mind. The drive to Sandy's office was a blur. His thoughts were a whirlwind of memories, regrets, and what-ifs. It wasn't just the failed ventures that bothered him. It was the people who had become casualties along the way. The office building was sleek and modern, a testament to Sandy's success in his own right. As Elon entered the lobby, the receptionist greeted him with a practiced smile, one that barely reached her eyes. Sandy had built his empire, and now it was time for Elon to face the consequences of his own empire crumbling. "Mr. Musk, Mr. Langford is expecting you," the receptionist said, gesturing toward the elevator. Elon nodded, muttering a polite thanks as he stepped inside. The ride up was brief, but every second felt like an eternity. The weight of the past months pressed down on him, suffocating him with their harshness. The elevator doors opened, and Elon stepped into the familiar yet strange environment of Sandy's office. The walls were adorned with pictures of successes, ventures, investments, and breakthroughs. Each photo seemed to mock him now. Once, these were the kinds of things he'd been proud of. Now, they felt like ghosts. Sandy was seated at his desk, his back to the large window that overlooked the city. He stood when Elon entered, offering a tight smile, but there was no warmth in it. "Elon," Sandy said, his voice steady but laced with concern. "It's good to see you. I'm glad you came." Elon didn't respond right away, his mind too heavy with thoughts to form the right words. Instead, he simply nodded, taking a seat across from Sandy. "I know things have been rough," Sandy began, leaning forward slightly. "But I'm not here to talk about your public image or how the media is tearing you apart. I'm here because I think there's something you're missing. Something you haven't considered." Elon raised an eyebrow, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "What do you mean?" Sandy paused, choosing his words carefully. "You've spent so long trying to solve the world's biggest problems, Elon. You've built rockets and electric cars. You've revolutionized industries. But somewhere along the way, you forgot something important." Elon looked at him, confused. "What's that?" "You forgot to take care of yourself. You've been so consumed with proving your worth to the world that you've lost sight of what actually matters. You're not just the CEO of SpaceX or Tesla. You're a human being. You have needs, emotions, relationships. And you've neglected them all." Elon recoiled slightly, taken aback by the bluntness of the statement. "I don't have time for emotions, Sandy. Time for relationships. The world needs what I'm doing. It always has." "Does it?" Sandy countered, his eyes hardening. "Or are you just trying to prove something to yourself? Something that isn't true?" For a moment, the room was silent. Elon could feel the weight of Sandy's words sinking in, but he didn't want to acknowledge them. The reality was too uncomfortable. "I didn't come here for a therapy session," Elon muttered, shifting in his seat. "I came here to figure out how to fix this." Sandy sighed, rubbing his eyes. "Fixing it doesn't mean trying to reinvent yourself with every failed venture. You need a foundation, Elon. You need to understand who you are without the companies, without the headlines. That's the only way you're going to get back on track." Elon clenched his jaw, the anger rising in his chest. "So what, I'm supposed to just quit everything and what? Start over? Go back to the drawing board like nothing ever happened?" "No," Sandy said, his voice softening. "You don't have to throw everything away. But you have to find balance. You have to find something that drives you outside of all this. Something that gives you the strength to rebuild. Because right now, the man you were is gone. And you need to figure out who you're going to be next. The conversation lingered in the back of Elon's mind as he left Sandy's office and walked out into the chaotic energy of Los Angeles once more. Sandy's words kept playing over and over, taunting him with their simplicity. It wasn't just the tech that he needed to fix. It was himself. In the past, Elon had always thrived on solving impossible problems. But this problem, his life, was different. There was no formula, no rocket equation that could make sense of it. This was a puzzle he couldn't solve with science or business acumen. For the first time in a long while, Elon wasn't sure what came next. But deep down, he knew that if he didn't figure out how to find himself again, everything he had built would be lost forever. The following days passed in a haze of uncertainty. Elon wandered through his routine, going through the motions of his day-to-day life, but his mind was elsewhere. Sandy's words echoed in his thoughts like a constant hum, always there, always reminding him of something he wasn't ready to confront. There was one question that gnawed at him, relentless in its persistence: who was Elon Musk without all the companies? Without the headlines, the accolades, the expectations? It wasn't just about fixing his businesses or salvaging his reputation, it was about rediscovering the man beneath the public persona. For years, Elon had poured everything into his vision of the future, into his quest for innovation. But now, sitting in the quiet of his penthouse, he wondered if that had been his biggest mistake. Had he built his entire identity around things that could crumble at any moment? Had he, in the process, lost sight of the most important thing, himself? It was a painful realization, one that he was too afraid to confront head-on. The next morning, Elon decided to take a walk, something he hadn't done in years. He had been so caught up in his ambitions, in the rush of ideas and deadlines, that he had forgotten what it was like to simply be. The city of Los Angeles, sprawling and vibrant, seemed to mirror his own internal chaos. Cars honked, people rushed by, their faces absorbed in their own worlds, just as he had been, until it all came crashing down. The sun beat down on him as he walked aimlessly, his thoughts drifting like the breeze. He passed by cafes, shops, and businesses that represented a world he no longer felt part of. He was no longer the pioneer. He wasn't the man who could command rooms or make game-changing decisions with a single glance. Now, he was just lost. As he turned a corner, he found himself in a small park. The sound of children playing, people laughing, and dogs barking brought him back to the present moment. It was a strange feeling, this sudden awareness of the world around him. A world that had gone on without him, without his grand ideas, without his technological dreams. He sat on a bench under a tree, letting the cool shade wash over him. His mind was still tangled, but for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel the weight of everything. It was a weight he hadn't been able to carry before, because he hadn't allowed himself to truly feel it. He closed his eyes for a moment, and in the stillness, memories began to flood in. Childhood. Growing up in Pretoria, South Africa. A family that wasn't poor, but wasn't rich either. His father, distant and critical. His mother, kind but with her own set of challenges. The longing. The desire to escape, to prove himself, to make a difference in a world that felt too small, too confined. Then, there was the moment he had left for Canada. A new beginning, a fresh start, away from the shadows of his father's influence. He had wanted to be a part of something bigger, to change the world in ways no one could imagine. And for a while, he had done that. He had done it. He had built Tesla, SpaceX, and other ventures that had made history. He had become the person he'd once dreamed of being. But now, with the weight of failure bearing down on him, it was clear that something had been lost along the way. As the afternoon sun began to set, Elon returned to his penthouse, his mind no clearer than before. But there was a shift in his perspective. For the first time in a long while, he realized that he didn't need to have all the answers right now. Maybe the answers would come, slowly, in the moments between the madness. Maybe it wasn't about fixing things all at once, but about simply starting with small steps, steps that allowed him to rediscover himself. Later that evening, he found himself in a conversation with one of his former colleagues, Rachel, who had been with him during the early days of SpaceX. She had always been the one to challenge him, to question his ideas when no one else had the courage to do so. "Hey, Elon," she said over the phone, her voice warm but firm. "I've been hearing about all the craziness. I just wanted to check in." "I'm managing," he said, though the words felt hollow even to him. "I'm glad to hear that," Rachel replied, though her tone was skeptical. "But I think you're missing the bigger picture." "What do you mean?" Elon asked, leaning against the counter in his kitchen, the weight of the conversation pulling him further into himself. "You've been so focused on changing the world," she said slowly. "But maybe it's time you focus on changing yourself. I know that sounds cliché, but you've been running from it for so long. You need to ask yourself, what drives you now? What do you really want out of life? It's not just about success. It's about meaning." The words hit him like a jolt of electricity, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself to listen. Meaning. It was a word he hadn't considered in years. "What if I've already done all that?" he said, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. "What if everything I've worked for has already been done? What if I've failed?" Rachel paused. "Failure isn't the end, Elon. It's just part of the journey. But it's up to you how you choose to move forward." Elon took a deep breath, his mind spinning. "I don't know where to start." "You don't have to know right now," she said gently. "Take it one day at a time. And don't be afraid to reach out for help. No one has to do this alone." As the call ended, Elon sat in silence for a long time. For the first time in ages, he didn't feel the overwhelming pressure to fix everything at once. Maybe it wasn't about fixing. Maybe it was about healing. Later that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Elon realized something: the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. There would be moments of doubt, moments of fear, moments when he wanted to give up. But maybe, just maybe, he could find a new kind of purpose, a new kind of drive, in the aftermath of it all. It wasn't over yet. The days blurred together. Elon's thoughts, once consumed with grand ideas and world-changing plans, now drifted into quieter, more reflective spaces. He found himself seeking comfort in small, mundane activities that he had long since overlooked. A walk in the park, a cup of coffee without an agenda, or simply staring out the window while watching the world go by. These were things he had never truly appreciated, but now, in the midst of his internal crisis, they offered a strange sort of solace. But it wasn't enough. He knew that. Elon had come to a realization over the last few days: he had been running from his own vulnerability. For so long, he had equated success with strength. But now, as everything he had worked for teetered on the brink of collapse, he felt exposed in a way he never had before. His mind buzzed with questions, with doubt, with fear about the future. Was he still capable of leading? Could he reinvent himself after all the mistakes, the failures, the broken relationships? His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him from his thoughts. It was an invitation, an unexpected one, from none other than Amelia, the woman he had met at the gala. Her message was short but direct. "Elon, I hope you're doing well. I've been thinking about our conversation the other night. There's something I'd like to talk to you about. Are you free for coffee tomorrow? Amelia." Elon stared at the message for a long moment. She was an enigma, a person who had seemed to see through his public persona and made him question his own identity. He hadn't expected to hear from her again, and yet, here she was, offering him an opportunity to meet. He hesitated, unsure of what to make of the invitation. He wasn't ready to dive back into the social circles, especially not with someone like Amelia, whose life seemed to be everything his wasn't: polished, confident, and undeniably successful. But there was a curiosity there, too. What did she see in him? What could she possibly want to talk about? Was it just about his companies, or was there something more? After a moment's thought, he tapped out a reply. "Sure, coffee sounds good." Tomorrow at 10. The next morning, Elon arrived at the cafe Amelia had suggested, a small, trendy spot in the heart of downtown. The cafe was filled with the hum of quiet conversation, the aroma of fresh espresso, and the faint sound of music playing softly in the background. It was the kind of place where people came to talk business, or simply to relax and take a break from the world outside. He found a quiet table by the window and waited, the weight of the uncertainty still hanging heavy on his shoulders. Minutes later, Amelia walked in. She was dressed casually but elegantly, her presence commanding yet unassuming. She spotted him immediately and walked over, offering a smile that seemed genuine, though there was something guarded in her eyes. "Hi, Elon," she said as she took a seat across from him. "I'm glad you could make it." "Of course," he replied, trying to keep his tone neutral. "Thanks for reaching out. I wasn't sure what to expect." "Well, that makes two of us," she said with a chuckle, signaling to the barista for a coffee. "I thought it would be nice to continue our conversation from the gala. You seemed different from the usual crowd." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" Amelia leaned back slightly, her expression thoughtful. "You weren't just another billionaire talking about his latest venture or his plans for the future. You seemed more human, I guess. It's refreshing, honestly. Most people in your position are so obsessed with their image that it's hard to get a sense of who they really are." Elon wasn't sure how to respond. He had always prided himself on being real, unapologetically so, but hearing it from her, especially in such a direct way, made him feel vulnerable. "I guess I've been trying to figure that out," he said after a beat. "Who I really am, I mean. Without the companies, without all the noise. It's harder than I thought." Amelia nodded. "I can imagine. It's easy to get lost in the role you play, especially when the world expects you to be something. But what if the real challenge isn't about fitting the mold? What if it's about breaking it completely?" Elon blinked, the weight of her words hitting him harder than he expected. "Breaking the mold?" "Yeah," she said, sipping her coffee. "You've spent your life being this larger-than-life figure, someone who builds rockets, electric cars, and all these big ideas. But what happens when you step out of that shadow? When you stop trying to prove something to the world and start doing things for you, for your own fulfillment?" Elon stared at her, momentarily speechless. It was as if she had peeled back a layer of his existence he hadn't even known was there. He had always been driven by ambition, by the need to prove that he could change the world. But Amelia was asking him to question everything. "I don't even know where to start," he admitted quietly. "I've spent so long being defined by my projects, by my failures and successes. Now that it's all unraveling, I don't know what's left. I don't know who I am anymore." "Maybe it's time to find out," she said softly, a hint of kindness in her voice. "Maybe you've spent so long being Elon Musk, the visionary, the innovator, that you've forgotten about the person behind the title. What does he want?" Elon leaned back, taking in her words. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the need to prove anything. He felt something akin to relief, a subtle release from the suffocating pressure of expectations. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with gratitude he didn't quite know how to express. "I didn't expect this. You've given me something to think about." Amelia smiled, her eyes softening. "You're welcome. Sometimes, the best thing you can do is stop trying to control everything and just be. The rest will fall into place eventually." As Elon left the cafe later that morning, he felt lighter than he had in a long time. Amelia's words echoed in his mind, stirring something deep within him. Maybe it was time to stop running from his own reflection. Maybe it was time to rebuild not just his empire, but himself. For the first time in ages, Elon allowed himself to consider the possibility that the answers might lie within, no new venture, no massive innovation, just him. And for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid of what he might find. Elon spent the following days mulling over his conversation with Amelia. He couldn't shake her words from his mind, the idea that maybe it wasn't about building rockets or electric cars anymore. Maybe it was about building something more personal, a new identity, a new path. But as he tried to embrace this notion, another voice inside him kept pushing back. What about your legacy? What if he couldn't let go of what had made him who he was? What if all of it was just over? The pressure was still there, but it felt different now. It wasn't just about the future anymore. It was about the past, about the decisions he had made, the relationships he had sacrificed along the way, and the burden of being constantly in the public eye. And now, with everything falling apart, he had to face the ghosts of his past, the ones that had haunted him for so long. It wasn't long before Elon found himself back in the place he had avoided for years, the family home in Pretoria, South Africa. He had spent so many years running away from this place, this legacy of a father who had never truly understood him, of a childhood where he had felt like an outsider. But now, after everything that had happened, he knew there was only one way forward. He needed to confront the past before he could even think about the future. The house was just as he remembered it, cold, distant, full of memories that made him feel small. His father, Elon Musk, was sitting in the same worn armchair by the fireplace when Elon entered. Elon's graying hair and stern face hadn't changed much, but his eyes, once sharp with judgment, now seemed distant and tired. "Dad," Elon said, his voice tentative. I need to talk to you." Errol didn't look up immediately. He was sipping a glass of whiskey, his fingers trembling slightly as he placed it down on the table. "What is it, Elon? Don't tell me you're here to ask for more money." Elon flinched, the familiar sting of his father's words cutting through him. "No, I don't need money. I need answers. I need to understand what went wrong." Errol finally looked up, his eyes narrowing. "What's wrong is that you've been chasing after things that will never make you happy. You always thought you could escape this place, escape your past, but you never could. You've always been running from something." Elon swallowed hard. He had spent his whole life trying to outrun his father's expectations, his disapproval, and the constant feeling that he wasn't enough. Now, facing him again after everything that had happened, the weight of those years hit him harder than he expected. "I'm not running anymore, Dad," Elon said, his voice quieter now. "But I need to understand why you never believed in me. Why you never supported me. I spent my entire life trying to prove myself, trying to be someone you could respect." Errol sighed, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "You've always been so obsessed with proving things to others. You were always too busy trying to make something of yourself that you couldn't see what was in front of you. The truth is, Elon, you've always been too stubborn to listen." The word stung more than he cared to admit, but there was something in his father's voice that made him pause. Maybe it was the weariness, or maybe it was the realization that this conversation wasn't about him, this was about his father's own failings, his own inability to connect. "I've spent so many years trying to make something of myself," Elon said, the frustration and sorrow in his voice palpable. "But now that it's all falling apart, I feel like I don't know who I am anymore. And I'm afraid that maybe everything I've worked for has been for nothing." Errol leaned back in his chair, his gaze shifting towards the window. The silence between them felt heavy, like it had always been. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Errol spoke again, his voice softer than before. "Maybe it's not about what you've built, Elon. Maybe it's about what you've lost in the process. Sometimes, the greatest achievements come with the greatest cost." Elon stared at his father, trying to digest the weight of his words. It wasn't the apology he had always wanted, but it was the closest thing to understanding that he had ever received from Errol. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. His father had always been a man trapped by his own failures, his own regrets. And now, for the first time, Elon could see that. The conversation with his father didn't bring any immediate answers, but it gave Elon something to think about. As he left the house that afternoon, the weight of his past still hung over him. But it was different now. He no longer felt the need to outrun it. He understood, for the first time, that he didn't have to be defined by his past mistakes or the relationships that had been broken. There was something powerful in that. In accepting the past, he could finally move forward. Back in Los Angeles, Elon felt a strange sense of clarity. The conversation with his father had been difficult, but it had also unlocked something inside him, a deep, personal truth that he had been avoiding. He didn't need to keep chasing after an identity that had been created for him by others. He didn't need to live up to the expectations of the world or the ghosts of his past. There was a part of him that still longed for the thrill of building something new, but now, he could see it differently. It wasn't about building a legacy for others, it was about finding a legacy for himself. A legacy of growth, of reinvention, and most importantly, of redemption. Elon took a deep breath as he stood by his balcony, staring out at the sprawling city below. There was still a long road ahead, and he didn't know where it would lead. But for the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he didn't have to fix everything at once. Maybe, like his father had said, the greatest achievements came with the greatest cost. But that didn't mean it was too late. It wasn't too late for him to start again. And maybe, just maybe, he could find peace in the process. Elon awoke to a fresh sense of purpose the following morning. The conversation with his father, though painful, had cracked open a door that had been shut for years. It wasn't just the weight of past regrets that weighed on him anymore, it was the realization that he had the power to change his story, he could steer his own narrative now. He had always been known for being a visionary, a leader of extraordinary enterprises. But what if the biggest vision of all wasn't about rockets or electric cars? What if it was about reinvention? What if the future he was building wasn't just for humanity, but for himself? His mind raced with possibilities as he sat in his office, staring out at the vast expanse of the city below. The tech world, the world of business, had always been a competitive battlefield, a game where only the strongest survived. But was that all there was to life? Elon had built empires. He had led SpaceX to the brink of revolutionizing space travel, and Tesla had completely reshaped the electric car market. But somewhere along the way, he had lost touch with the person behind the numbers, the boardrooms, and the headlines. It was time to rediscover that person. Later that day, Elon decided to take a step that felt strange but necessary. He reached out to an old friend, someone who had always been a guiding force in his life, even when their paths had diverged. Kara, a former colleague at PayPal, had always been more than just a business partner. She had been a sounding board, a mentor, and someone who had always reminded him to focus on the bigger picture, the long-term impact. "Hey Kara, it's Elon. Can we meet up? I need your advice," he texted, pressing send before he had time to second-guess himself. Her response was quick, as always, "Of course. I'll meet you at the usual place in an hour." Elon smiled. It was comforting, in a way, that some things never changed. The familiar sense of camaraderie with Kara was like stepping back into a place of warmth and understanding, a place where the pressure of the outside world felt miles away. The cafe they met at was small, tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. Kara was already there when Elon arrived, sitting at their usual table by the window, sipping a cappuccino. She was wearing her usual warm smile, though her eyes were observant, taking in everything about him as he walked in. "You look like someone who's been doing a lot of thinking," she said as Elon sat down, her voice soft but knowing. Elon let out a small laugh. "You could say that. I've been reevaluating a lot lately. About my work, my life. Everything, really." Kara raised an eyebrow. "That sounds serious. What's going on?" Elon hesitated for a moment. He had always been an open book with Kara, she had a way of making him feel like he could talk about anything without judgment. But this was different. This was personal. "I've been running on autopilot for a long time," he began, his voice quieter than usual. "I've built these empires, SpaceX, Tesla, all of it, and I've been so focused on what's next that I forgot to ask myself why I was doing it all. And now, with everything that's happened, I don't even know what's left. Kara's expression softened, and she leaned forward slightly. You've always had a bigger vision than most. But you're right, sometimes we forget why we started in the first place. So what's the answer you're looking for? Elon took a deep breath, considering her question. I think I need to figure out who I am without the success, without the titles, without the public persona. I've spent so much time trying to prove something to everyone else. I don't even know who I am when I'm not Elon Musk, the CEO, the founder. Kara nodded slowly, her eyes understanding. You know, it's easy to get lost in the title. But that's not who you are, Elon. You've always been someone who challenges the impossible, who looks at a problem and says, why not? But somewhere along the way, you forgot to ask yourself what you actually want. Elon absorbed her words, feeling a weight lift from his chest. What I want? I don't even know anymore. Well, you can't answer that question by continuing to do the same thing you've always done, Kara said gently. You need to take a step back. Take time for yourself. Explore what really matters to you. Elon let out a sigh, the exhaustion of his internal battle beginning to show. I've spent my life building, and now I'm at a crossroads. I'm not sure what's next. Kara smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mix of mischief and wisdom. Elon, the whole world thinks you're crazy, but the truth is, you're probably one of the most fearless people I know. You've always gone after things no one else would even dream of. Now it's time for you to take that fearlessness and apply it to something more personal, yourself. Elon leaned back in his chair, absorbing her advice. It wasn't a grand revelation, but it felt like the first real step forward in his journey to rediscovery. The world would still expect him to lead, to innovate, to revolutionize. But he didn't have to rush. Maybe the greatest challenge now was to be still for a while, to reflect on what truly mattered. Later that night, Elon sat at the piano in his living room, his fingers lightly brushing the keys. Music had always been a part of him, a quiet outlet he had neglected over the years. As the soft notes filled the room, he felt a sense of peace, something he hadn't felt in ages. The melodies were a reminder that there was still beauty in simplicity, in the quiet moments between the chaos. For so long, he had equated his worth with his achievements, with the things he had built. But now, sitting at the piano, he realized that perhaps there was more to life than just the hustle. There was a place for creativity, for reflection, for human connection beyond the boardroom. And for the first time in a long time, he felt like he could breathe. As he finished playing, the room silent except for the faint echo of the final chord, Elon understood something profound. The future wasn't just about changing the world, it was about embracing the journey, learning from the past, and having the courage to walk a new path. Maybe that was the true test of greatness. The days following his conversation with Kara and the reflective time he spent with his piano were filled with a new sense of clarity, but also a deep sense of uncertainty. For Elon, uncertainty was both uncomfortable and liberating. He had always thrived in a world where he could control every variable, where every problem had a solution. But now, for the first time, he realized that the next phase of his life wasn't about solving problems, it was about embracing the unknown. He didn't know what would come next. But one thing was clear, he had to let go. Let go of the pressures that had defined him, let go of the expectations that had burdened him for so long, and most importantly, let go of the need to always be Elon Musk, the visionary. He had been living in the shadow of his own success, constantly driven by the need to prove himself, to be more, to be everything to everyone. The first step toward change, he understood, was letting go. It wasn't easy. It was, in many ways, the hardest thing he had ever had to do. But it was also the most necessary. Elon found himself standing at the edge of the property that surrounded his mansion in Los Angeles. The wind was brisk, and the sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the kind of sunset that made everything seem still, peaceful, and somehow eternal. He had always prided himself on being a forward thinker, someone who never looked back, always charging ahead toward the next big challenge. But now, standing there with his thoughts adrift in the evening air, he couldn't help but look back. He thought about the years he had spent building PayPal, only to sell it and move on to Tesla. Then, there was the rise of SpaceX, the meteoric growth of Tesla, and all the other ventures he had dabbled in. But there was something in all of that, the constant push, the never-ending drive, that had kept him from really seeing what he had left behind. In the past few weeks, the realization had slowly begun to sink in. He had been so focused on building things that he had neglected to build himself. The next morning, Elon took a step that surprised even him. He reached out to Amelia. She had become someone he could talk to about the deeper things, the things that really mattered. Over the past few weeks, they had exchanged messages, mostly about trivial things, but today he felt like it was time to share more. "I've been thinking about everything we talked about," Elon texted. "I've been doing a lot of soul-searching. I think I've reached a point where I need to let go of a lot of things. Not just business, but a lot of old ideas about who I'm supposed to be." Her reply was quick. "That's huge, Elon. Letting go is never easy, but it's always necessary for growth. Where are you now? How are you feeling?" Elon thought for a moment before responding, "Honestly, I don't know. I feel like I'm at the edge of something new, but I don't have a clear path ahead of me. I just know that I need to be true to myself now. And maybe, for once, I need to stop running from who I was." The message sat on his screen for a moment before Amelia replied, "You're already doing it, Elon. You're embracing the hard stuff. And that's what makes you strong." Elon smiled as he read her words. She was right. It was hard. But it was also the first step towards something that didn't require him to be perfect, something that didn't require him to be the person the world expected him to be. A week later, Elon found himself in a new place, a small cabin tucked away in the mountains of Northern California. It was nothing like the lavish homes he had built for himself over the years. No sprawling estates or futuristic designs. This was simplicity. This was quiet. This was the kind of place that gave him space to think without the constant pressure of expectations. The cabin was secluded, perched on the side of a mountain overlooking a serene lake. No one could find him here unless he wanted them to. It was exactly what he needed. The silence was almost suffocating at first, but as the days passed, he began to appreciate it. It was the kind of silence that allowed him to finally hear his own thoughts without the noise of the outside world drowning them out. One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Elon sat on the porch, a cup of tea in hand. He looked out over the calm water, the reflection of the trees dancing on its surface. The world seemed so far away. And in that distance, for the first time in years, he felt a sense of peace. There was no need to prove anything here. There were no investors to impress, no board meetings to attend, no rockets to launch. It was just him, the quiet, and the space to reflect. That night, after a simple dinner of soup and bread, Elon sat by the fireplace. The crackling fire created a soothing rhythm, and he couldn't help but think about his journey so far. It had been filled with triumphs, yes. But it had also been filled with sacrifices, the relationships lost, the time he had taken for granted, the way he had driven himself into the ground. But now, in this moment, he felt the weight of those mistakes, and it wasn't unbearable. It was part of the process. He was learning to forgive himself. The journey of letting go wasn't just about walking away from things. It was about embracing the vulnerability that came with acknowledging what had been lost and choosing not to be defined by it. It was a form of healing. Elon picked up his phone and sent a simple message to Kara, "Thank you for helping me see what I couldn't. I'm finally starting to get it." He wasn't sure what the future would hold. But for the first time in a long time, he was okay with not knowing. As the fire flickered and the night grew still around him, Elon knew that the next chapter in his life wouldn't come with grand speeches or announcements to the world. It would come quietly, gradually, through the decisions he made to build something real for himself, not just for the world. He was no longer chasing after validation. He was learning, for the first time, to validate himself. And that, he realized, was the hardest, most rewarding achievement of all. The quiet retreat in Northern California provided Elon with the mental space he desperately needed. It wasn't a solution to his problems, but it was a start. The stillness was helping him put pieces together, pieces he'd spent years overlooking or, worse, intentionally ignoring. But peace, like everything else in his life, didn't last forever. The world continued to turn. The pressure, the expectations, the constant demand for more, they weren't going to wait for him to figure things out. As the days blurred into one another, a sense of unease began to creep back into his mind. The weight of his obligations, his responsibilities, began to claw at him. It was inevitable, sooner or later, he would have to confront the messiness of the world outside his sanctuary. One crisp morning, as the first light of dawn filtered through the cabin's small windows, Elon received a call that jolted him from his reverie. Mr. Musk, the voice on the other end was sharp, efficient. It was Jenna, his personal assistant. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we've got a situation. There's been a significant issue with one of SpaceX's contracts with the government. They're threatening to pull the funding if we don't deliver results on time." Elon's mind immediately snapped back into CEO mode. The weight of responsibility, the very thing he had been avoiding, rushed back into his chest. He hadn't expected it to come this quickly. His decision to step away, to pause and reflect, was beginning to feel irresponsible. After all, his empire wasn't built on pause, it was built on constant forward motion, on getting things done. He leaned against the wooden beam of the cabin's porch, his hand gripping the phone tighter than necessary. "What exactly happened?" he asked, his voice steady but betraying a trace of irritation. "It's a compliance issue," Jenna explained. "Some regulatory requirements were overlooked, and now the government's breathing down our necks. They want a meeting first thing Monday morning. They expect answers." Elon's mind raced. Regulatory issues. He had always prided himself on staying ahead of the game, on pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But now, his failure to keep up with the nuances of regulations threatened to undo everything he'd worked for. "All right," he replied, shaking off the grogginess of the morning and steeling himself. "I'll be back in the office by the end of the week. I'll take the lead on this one." By the time he arrived back in Palo Alto, the weight of the issue had intensified. It wasn't just SpaceX that was at risk. If they lost the government contract, it could send a ripple effect through all his ventures. Tesla, boring company, even his personal projects, everything had the potential to be tied up in this one misstep. The usual hustle and bustle of the SpaceX headquarters felt stifling, and Elon's mind swirled as he walked into the meeting room. The familiar faces of his leadership team greeted him, their expressions tight with worry. "All right, team," Elon began, taking his seat at the head of the table. He had always been the one to steer these conversations, to lead with confidence. But today, it wasn't just the pressure of work he was feeling. It was the weight of his personal journey, the pressure to live up to the person he wanted to be. Could he still be the visionary, the leader, that everyone expected him to be? "We have a major problem," he continued, pushing aside his internal doubts. "Jenna's right. We can't afford to lose this contract. Not just for SpaceX, but for everything we've worked for. We need a solution, and we need it fast." The room was silent for a moment, the tension palpable. One of his engineers, David, spoke up. "We can work around the compliance issues, but it's going to take time to clear up the paperwork and get the necessary approvals. It's going to push back the entire timeline." "And if we don't meet the government's deadline?" Elon asked, his voice cold. "They'll pull the contract," David said quietly. The stakes were high. His entire reputation, everything he had built, hung in the balance. Elon paused, his mind churning. For years, he had been used to making decisions in the heat of the moment, trusting his gut to push forward no matter the consequences. But now, in the midst of the storm, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something else at play, something deeper than just the bottom line. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of his leadership team, each of them silently watching him for direction. The weight of their trust, of their expectations, was almost unbearable. And yet, in this moment, he realized that the world wasn't just waiting for his next big innovation. The world was waiting for him to rise above the challenges, to lead in a way that showed his true growth. "Okay," he said finally, his voice steadier than before. "We're going to make this work. But this time, we're not just going to do it because it's expected. We're going to do it right. We'll stay ahead of the compliance issues, but I want us to reevaluate everything we're doing at SpaceX. Let's not just work toward a deadline. Let's work toward something that's going to set us up for long-term success." He stood up, pacing as he spoke, the old spark returning in his eyes. "This is about more than getting the contract back. It's about doing things the right way, the sustainable way. We're going to innovate the process, not just the product." Elon could feel the team's energy shift. The tension in the room started to dissipate, replaced by the familiar drive to solve a problem, to move forward. As the meeting wrapped up, Elon found himself back at his desk, staring out at the Silicon Valley skyline. The sun was beginning to set again, the horizon glowing with soft, orange light. The world outside was still moving, just as it always had. But for the first time in days, he felt a strange sense of calm. He had faced the reckoning, the challenge that had pulled him back into the world of high stakes and even higher expectations. But this time, it felt different. This wasn't about being the best, the most successful. This time, it was about doing things the right way. And that, he realized, was the true test. Not just for SpaceX, but for himself. He wasn't going to let fear drive him anymore. He was going to face his challenges with integrity and purpose. It was time to move forward, not just as a CEO, but as the man he was learning to become. Elon had spent years carving out a place for himself at the top. He was a man who lived with urgency, always on the move, always pushing towards something greater, something bigger. And while that drive had made him a titan of industry, it had also made him someone who, at times, struggled to see the bigger picture, the life outside of his work, the people in his life who mattered, and most importantly, the person he was becoming in the process. But the events of the past few weeks had opened his eyes to a reality he hadn't been ready to face. He was at a crossroads. Not just professionally, but personally. The weight of his past decisions and the sacrifices he'd made were catching up to him. The world expected him to continue at full speed, to keep innovating, to keep building empires. But for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if that was what he really wanted anymore. The SpaceX crisis was far from over, but the team had made progress. They had figured out a temporary workaround for the compliance issues and were working tirelessly to get the government back on their side. But even with the team pushing forward, Elon felt a gnawing emptiness inside him. He wasn't sure what it was, but something told him that this moment, this crisis, was a signal. It was time to reevaluate everything. One afternoon, as the weight of the looming deadline for the government contract continued to press on him, Elon found himself in a familiar spot, sitting at the piano, his fingers brushing the keys absent-mindedly. The music wasn't flowing like it had in the cabin, and for a moment, he questioned if he'd lost that part of himself forever. He stared at the keys, a bitter realization rising within him. Had he sacrificed too much for success? Just then, his phone buzzed. A message from Amelia. He hadn't spoken to her in a few days. She had been busy with her own life, and he had been wrapped up in the whirlwind of his obligations. "Hey Elon, I know things have been crazy, but I wanted to check in. How are you holding up?" He stared at the text for a long time, unsure of how to respond. He wasn't the type to admit vulnerability, but something about Amelia's message, her consistent presence in his life, made him want to share, to be honest about the struggle he was facing. After a long pause, he typed back, "I'm not sure. I feel like I'm standing at a crossroads, Amelia. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for, it feels like it's all just spinning out of control." The reply came quickly, "I get that. But sometimes standing still can be the most important thing. Have you ever thought about stepping back, even just for a little while? Elon had no immediate response. A step back. It sounded impossible. Everything he'd done had been about moving forward, relentlessly pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But Amelia's words echoed in his mind. He looked back at the piano, the keys staring at him as though they were asking him to make a decision. What was he really after? Later that evening, after another long day of meetings and strategy sessions with his team, Elon took a walk along the trails that wound through his property. The cool night air filled his lungs, and he felt his mind begin to clear. As he walked, he realized just how disconnected he had become from the world around him. He had been so consumed by the drive to succeed, to change the world, that he had neglected to change himself. He had sacrificed friendships, relationships, and even his own peace of mind, all in the name of progress. This feeling, this deep, unsettling sense of misalignment, was something he couldn't ignore anymore. That night, as he lay in bed, his mind kept circling back to the same thought: what if I'm not just building companies? What if I'm building a legacy that's not meant for me? The next morning, as dawn broke and sunlight spilled through the windows of his bedroom, Elon sat up, his heart pounding. It was time. He couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine, that he was in control of it all. He had to make a choice, and it was going to be the hardest decision of his life. He knew he couldn't go back to the way things were. But he also knew that stepping away from everything, abandoning his life's work, was not an option either. There had to be a balance, a way to preserve the legacy he had built while allowing space for personal growth, relationships, and meaning beyond business. Elon picked up his phone and called Jenna, his assistant. He didn't need to be reminded of the ongoing crisis, but he knew he had to take the first step toward clarity, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. "Jenna, I need to talk to you about something," Elon said, his voice steady but firm. "Of course, Elon. What's going on?" "I've been thinking about how to move forward," he began, the words coming more easily than he expected. "I know the government deadline is approaching, and I know the team is working hard. But I need to take a step back. I'm going to focus on leading from a distance for now. I'm going to need you to handle the day-to-day and keep me updated, but I'm not going to be in the trenches the way I've always been." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. "Are you sure about this, Elon? You've always been hands-on, especially with SpaceX. I know this is important to you." "I'm sure," Elon said, his voice gaining strength. "It's time for me to let the team lead. It's time for me to find my own path again, outside of all this." Jenna hesitated for a moment, but then she responded, "All right, Elon. If that's what you need, we'll make it work. You've always said we're a team. I'll take care of it." As he hung up the phone, Elon felt a sense of liberation wash over him. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't a decision he had come to lightly. But it felt like the right one. He had finally acknowledged something he had been running from for years: he was more than the sum of his companies, his wealth, and his achievements. It was time to start living for himself, for the person he wanted to be, not just the person everyone expected him to be. He took a deep breath and stood at the window, looking out at the sprawling valley below. The world was vast, and the possibilities were endless. But for the first time in a long time, Elon Musk wasn't thinking about the next project. He was thinking about the next chapter in his life, the one that was just for him. And that, he realized, was the true crossroads. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For the first time in a long while, Elon Musk felt a quiet peace settle over him. It wasn't the peace that came from solving a complex problem or making a breakthrough in technology. No, this peace was different. It was the peace of simply being, of stepping away from the grind, of embracing a moment of stillness. He had made a difficult decision to pull back from the everyday chaos of his companies. As he sat on the terrace of his sprawling property, overlooking the lush hills of Northern California, he reflected on the choice he had made. The companies were in good hands, and his team was more than capable. But for Elon, the real work had only just begun. It wasn't about leading SpaceX and Tesla from the front anymore, it was about leading himself. The next few days were a blur of introspection. Elon found himself waking up at dawn and taking long walks through the quiet forest surrounding his home. He spent hours meditating, trying to connect with the part of himself he had ignored for so long. He played the piano more often, allowing the music to flow through him, almost as if it was a part of his soul trying to speak. One afternoon, as he sat by the piano, something unexpected happened. He picked up his phone, glancing at the screen. There was a message from Amelia. "Hey, Elon. I've been thinking. You've been through a lot, and I can see you're changing. But change isn't easy. If you need someone to talk to, I'm here. Maybe we could meet up soon." Elon smiled softly. Amelia had always been there for him, even when he didn't deserve it. Her presence was grounding, and the idea of spending time with her, away from the pressures of his empire, was exactly what he needed. He quickly typed back, "I'd love that. Let's meet tomorrow afternoon." The next day, Elon drove into the city to meet Amelia at a quiet cafe. It was a stark contrast to the usual high-powered meetings he was accustomed to, but in that moment, it felt like exactly what he needed. When Amelia arrived, she greeted him with a warm smile. "Hey, stranger," she said, sliding into the seat across from him. Elon smiled back. "I know, I've been out of touch. But honestly, I think I needed this. I've been taking some time to reflect." She nodded knowingly. "I figured. You've been through a lot, Elon. You've been running at full speed for so long. It's about time you gave yourself a break." "I didn't realize how much I was neglecting myself until I stopped," he admitted. "I've been so focused on the future, on building things, on changing the world, that I forgot to live in the moment." Amelia studied him carefully. "It's easy to get caught up in that, especially when the world expects so much from you. But it's okay to stop and breathe. It's okay to just be." Her words resonated deeply with him. He'd spent years trying to meet the world's expectations, but he had never really asked himself what he wanted. What his future looked like, beyond the companies and the public persona. "I'm trying to figure that out," he said quietly, almost as if the word surprised him. "What do I want? What does Elon Musk outside of all this stuff look like?" The conversation flowed easily after that, with Elon and Amelia discussing everything from philosophy to art to their shared love of music. It was a reminder of the parts of himself that had been buried under the weight of his responsibilities. The man who could sit and enjoy a conversation without rushing to the next meeting, the man who could appreciate the beauty in a song or a sunset, that was the part of him he had been losing. By the time they parted ways later that evening, Elon felt lighter than he had in years. He realized that Amelia was right, it wasn't just about doing anymore. It was about being. Over the next few weeks, Elon continued to take time for himself. He spent more time with his family and friends, rediscovered his love for music, and even started dabbling in painting, a hobby he had once abandoned. But despite the newfound peace in his personal life, there was still a nagging feeling in the back of his mind. He couldn't fully escape the responsibility he felt toward his companies. They were a part of him, and he knew they would always be. But something else was beginning to take shape, a new vision. One evening, as he was winding down in his study, Elon pulled out a piece of paper and began writing. He wasn't sure what he was doing at first, maybe just jotting down thoughts, maybe brainstorming. But as the words began to form, he realized something profound. He wasn't just looking for a way to escape the pressure of his work. He was looking for a way to integrate his passions, his personal growth, and his professional life in a way that made sense for him. He wanted to be more than just the CEO of Tesla or the founder of SpaceX. He wanted to be a true innovator, someone who didn't just build machines or rockets but who helped create a world where people could live more fulfilled, more connected lives. That night, Elon sent a message to his trusted team, asking for a meeting. He knew he had been absent from the daily grind, but it was time to return, not as the all-powerful leader who demanded results, but as a collaborator. He wanted to work alongside his team, not just dictate their moves. When the team assembled, Elon shared his thoughts. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," he began, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "I want us to shift our focus. We've done incredible things, but I believe we can do more. I want us to start integrating our technologies in ways that directly improve people's lives, not just in the realm of transportation or space, but in the way we live day to day." There was a long pause before David, one of his senior engineers, spoke. "What exactly do you mean?" "I mean," Elon continued, "we've focused so much on the big, flashy projects, the ones that change industries. But what if we took a step back and focused on making life better for everyone, more sustainable, more connected, more accessible? I think we're ready for a new kind of innovation, one that's not just about the next product but about the next life we create together." As the meeting continued, Elon felt something shift inside him. He wasn't the same man who had built his empire on relentless drive and ambition. He had evolved, and so too must his companies. This was his new path, a path that balanced innovation with humanity, progress with purpose. As he left the meeting, he walked through the halls of the SpaceX facility, looking at the engineers and designers who were already working tirelessly on the next big thing. He realized that this was the future, one where not just technology, but human connection and well-being, were at the forefront. It was time to truly lead, not just in business, but in life. In the weeks that followed, Elon Musk began to reshape the way he viewed his role, not just as a visionary but as a human being with a responsibility to the world around him. He took a different approach to his work, allowing himself to step back from the day-to-day operations and entrust his teams with more decision-making power. His companies, once reliant on his constant presence, were now being led by a collective vision, a vision that extended beyond technological achievements and toward a future where people's lives were genuinely improved. But even as he focused more on personal growth and reconnecting with the people around him, a part of Elon couldn't escape the magnitude of the challenges that still loomed over him. SpaceX had a critical mission that would change the course of human space exploration forever. Tesla's drive for sustainable energy solutions was more urgent than ever. And there were whispers about new competitors entering the market, seeking to challenge his dominance. Elon had always been a man of action, someone who responded to challenges with relentless determination. But now, as he approached the tipping point in both his personal and professional life, he found himself torn between two very different worlds, the world of innovation that had made him a household name, and the quieter, more introspective life he was now trying to embrace. One evening, as Elon sat alone in his study, he was jolted from his thoughts by a knock on the door. It was Jenna, his assistant, holding a tablet in her hands. She looked unusually serious. "Elon," she said, stepping into the room. "There's something we need to talk about." Elon raised an eyebrow. "What's going on?" "SpaceX has just received a message from the government. The Mars contract, it's not looking good. There's been a shift in policy, and the competition is becoming fiercer. They're questioning the viability of our long-term goals," Jenna explained. Elon's heart sank. He had known that space exploration wasn't without its political risks, but he had always believed that SpaceX was untouchable, that his vision was too strong, too far-reaching to be undermined by bureaucratic games. But this was different. The government had always been a steady partner, but now, the very foundation of his dream was being questioned. "What are our options?" Elon asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We can appeal," Jenna said, "but it's going to be a long and difficult process. The competition, other companies, are closing the gap. They have government contracts, and they're making progress at a pace that's concerning." Elon's mind raced. He had built SpaceX from the ground up, defying every expectation and overcoming countless obstacles. The idea that it could all fall apart over political games and shifting priorities was almost too much to bear. But then, something within him shifted. It wasn't just the company at stake anymore, it was the future of humanity. The drive that had fueled him for so many years, that had pushed him to launch rockets and send electric cars into space, was still there. And now, it wasn't just about survival, it was about ensuring the dream didn't die. "I'll handle it," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We can't afford to lose this." The next day, Elon summoned his top advisors and engineers to discuss the crisis. The room was filled with tension, but Elon remained calm, his mind focused on finding a solution. As the meeting progressed, he realized something that had been building within him for weeks: he wasn't just fighting for SpaceX anymore. He was fighting for something bigger, something that could change the world in ways he hadn't even fully realized yet. "What if we didn't just appeal to the government?" Elon said, his voice steady but filled with determination. "What if we started pushing for a more radical shift in space policy? What if we could show the world that private companies, not just government entities, can take humanity to the stars? We're not just trying to land on Mars, we're trying to redefine the future of human existence." His words hung in the air for a moment before his team began to respond. They were inspired, fired up by his vision. This was no longer just about contracts or competition, it was about purpose, about making an impact that transcended all the business models and financial concerns. It was about humanity's destiny. That night, Elon sat in his office, alone. The weight of the decision ahead of him was daunting, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a renewed sense of clarity. The moment he had feared, the tipping point where he could no longer balance his personal and professional lives, had arrived. But instead of feeling overwhelmed by it, he felt energized. He had always believed that innovation and progress were the answers to the world's problems. But now, he saw that the answers didn't just come from technology, they came from a deeper understanding of the world, of people, and of himself. He picked up his phone and dialed Amelia's number. She answered almost immediately. "Elon," she said, her voice a calming presence. "What's on your mind?" "I've been thinking," Elon began, "about everything. About SpaceX, about Tesla, about my life, about what I really want to achieve." "And?" Amelia prompted. "I think I'm ready to go all in again," he said quietly. "But this time, it's not just about the companies or the fame. It's about creating something that will last. Something that changes the way we live, not just as individuals, but as a society. I don't want to just build rockets. I want to build a future." Amelia was silent for a moment, but when she spoke, her voice was warm with understanding. "I knew you would find your way, Elon. You've always been on a different path. But now, it sounds like you're truly ready to make a difference." Elon smiled, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "Yeah. I think I am." The following weeks were a whirlwind. Elon doubled down on his vision for the future of space exploration. He made public statements advocating for a new, radical shift in policy. He reached out to global leaders and thinkers, building coalitions with companies and organizations that shared his vision. It wasn't just about Mars anymore, it was about creating a new era of human exploration and interplanetary living. But despite the pressure and uncertainty that surrounded him, Elon remained grounded. He continued to spend time with the people who mattered to him, with Amelia, and with his family. He wasn't just building companies, he was building a legacy. And in that moment, he knew that everything he had been through had led him to this very point, the tipping point, where his true purpose would finally emerge. The months following Elon's shift in focus were filled with incredible developments. SpaceX's bold new direction took root, and the idea of private space companies not just supporting, but leading the charge for humanity's future in space, began to gain traction. Elon's ambitious vision started to reshape the conversation around the future of space exploration. In the high-tech corridors of Silicon Valley, where disruption and innovation were constants, it didn't take long for Elon's renewed purpose to ripple outward. He began to receive unexpected calls from influential people in the tech and energy industries, each wanting to contribute to his vision. But the offers didn't just come from the expected quarters, there were those from unexpected allies. One evening, Elon was sitting in a meeting room with a group of his SpaceX engineers when his phone buzzed on the table. He looked down, seeing the name, Jeff Bezos. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. The rivalry between SpaceX and Blue Origin had always been intense, but lately, there was a growing sense of competition to push the boundaries of what was possible in space. Their respective visions had always been different, but in some ways, they shared similar goals: to make space travel accessible, to enable a future where humanity could live beyond Earth. He answered the call, holding his phone to his ear. "Elon," Jeff's voice came through clearly. "I've been following your recent comments, and I have to admit, I'm impressed. I know we've been competitors for a long time, but I think it's time we set that aside for the greater good. There's a lot we could accomplish if we work together." Elon leaned back in his chair, a smile tugging at the corner of his lips. This was unexpected, to say the least. "You're serious about this?" "I am," Jeff replied, his tone firm but measured. "I've been thinking about the future of humanity, too. And I know that SpaceX and Blue Origin both have the potential to do something truly extraordinary. But it's going to take more than one company. It's going to take collaboration. The future isn't about us fighting each other, it's about the progress of the human race." Elon's mind raced. This was a chance to reshape not just space travel, but the entire approach to how humanity ventured into the stars. But it wasn't without its risks. Working with Jeff meant navigating their rivalry, dealing with the potential fallout from their competitors and supporters alike. Could they really come together for the greater good? "I'll think about it," Elon said after a moment, weighing the implications. "Good," Jeff replied. "Let me know when you're ready to discuss." A week later, Elon stood on the stage of a major technology conference, addressing a crowd that had gathered to hear about the future of space exploration. His speech had been planned for months, but something had changed since the conversation with Jeff. As he spoke, he could feel a new sense of determination coursing through him. Space is the future of humanity. It's not just about reaching Mars or making life multiplanetary, it's about ensuring that humanity thrives. It's about expanding the reach of human potential and using technology to make that possible. He paused, letting the words sink in, his eyes scanning the crowd. And the time for competition is over. The time for collaboration has begun. We have the technology, we have the expertise, and together, we can build the future. Let's make it happen. The crowd erupted in applause, and Elon felt the weight of his words settle into his chest. He wasn't just speaking for himself anymore, he was speaking for the world. And with this shift, a new horizon had opened before him. Back at SpaceX headquarters, things were moving fast. Discussions with Blue Origin were progressing. Elon had already sent out a few exploratory emails to other key players in the space industry, making it clear that he was serious about collaboration. He knew the stakes were high. Collaborating with Jeff Bezos, even if it was for the right reasons, was no small matter. But he had come to realize something crucial: the future of space travel couldn't be achieved by one company, one person, or even one nation. It would take a global effort. It was during one of these strategy sessions that Elon had an idea that would send shockwaves throughout the industry. "What if we didn't just build rockets to explore space?" he said, his eyes lighting up with excitement. "What if we used those rockets to build the infrastructure needed to live on Mars? Not just for humans, but for entire industries." His team looked at him curiously, waiting for him to elaborate. "We can't just talk about sending humans to Mars," Elon continued. "We need to think about how we'll sustain life there. We'll need energy, food, water, everything that makes life possible here on Earth. And we need to start building that infrastructure now." It was a bold vision, but it was one that could change everything. Instead of focusing solely on sending people to Mars, SpaceX could take a broader approach, creating the first building blocks of a sustainable, livable colony on Mars. It would take years, perhaps decades, to fully realize this goal, but the concept was groundbreaking. And in true Elon fashion, it pushed the limits of what was considered possible. As the days passed, Elon's sense of urgency intensified. The conversations with Jeff Bezos had gone from theoretical to practical, and the groundwork for their collaboration was well underway. But there was still so much to be done. Elon knew that in order to move forward with this vision, he needed to ensure that his companies were in the right place, both in terms of resources and personnel. He began to shift his focus even further, diving deeper into the technological innovations that would make life on Mars possible. He started working with leading scientists, engineers, and architects to develop technologies that could solve the biggest challenges humanity would face on another planet. From renewable energy systems to closed-loop water recycling systems, from advanced habitats to self-sustaining food production methods, every detail had to be accounted for. But amid all the progress, there were challenges. People questioned whether humanity was ready for such an ambitious endeavor. Would we ever be able to establish a permanent colony on Mars? Could the world's government support such an initiative? And perhaps most pressing, could Elon and Jeff actually put their rivalry aside long enough to truly work together? Elon's confidence never wavered. He had faced impossible odds before, and he would face them again. But this time, the stakes were higher than ever before. It wasn't just about winning. It was about ensuring that humanity had a future. One late evening, after a long day of meetings, Elon sat at his piano, letting the soothing sounds of the keys calm his mind. The music always helped him find clarity, and tonight, as his fingers gently pressed the keys, he allowed himself to feel the weight of what he was undertaking. But he also felt something else, hope. Hope that this new horizon, this future he was building, would bring the world closer together and bring humanity one step closer to becoming a multiplanetary species. He wasn't just dreaming anymore. He was building the future. As the months passed, Elon's ambition to reshape humanity's future continued to take root. The collaboration between SpaceX and Blue Origin had officially begun, and with it came a renewed sense of purpose in the space industry. Together, Elon and Jeff Bezos weren't just racing toward Mars, they were laying the foundation for a new era of space exploration. But with great ambition came immense pressure, and Elon quickly realized that this was no longer just about rockets or technology. It was about uniting a fractured world for a common cause. Elon had always been a visionary, but now, he felt like he was standing at the precipice of something monumental. The future of space was not just about sending people to Mars, it was about global cooperation, overcoming political boundaries, and ensuring that humanity's future wasn't just dependent on one planet. He knew that if they were to succeed, they would need the support of governments, organizations, and citizens from all corners of the globe. One chilly morning, as Elon sat in his office in the SpaceX headquarters, his phone buzzed on his desk. He glanced at the screen to see a message from Amelia. It was simple, yet its implications were far-reaching. Elon, there's an opportunity for you to address the UN about global space cooperation. I think this could be a game changer. Let's talk. Elon's thoughts immediately turned to the significance of this moment. The United Nations was not just a political body, it was a symbol of the collective will of the world. If he could get the support of global leaders, if they could all unite behind the vision of interplanetary exploration, there was no limit to what could be achieved. He quickly dialed Amelia. "What's the story?" he asked. "High stakes," she replied, her voice clear and focused. "They're planning a summit on global space initiatives, and they want you to keynote the event. They're calling for collaboration between countries, corporations, and space agencies. It's an unprecedented move, and it's happening soon." Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This could be the turning point he'd been waiting for. The speech he had to give wasn't just about selling SpaceX's vision or making a pitch, it was about convincing the world that humanity had to unite for the next giant leap. It was about showing the world that the future of space exploration was no longer just a matter of national interest, it was a matter of survival. "I'm in," Elon said, the decision firm in his voice. "Let's make this happen." Weeks later, the United Nations Summit on Global Space Cooperation was underway. It was being held in New York City, and world leaders from every corner of the globe had gathered, each bringing their own vision for the future of space exploration. Representatives from the European Space Agency, NASA, China's space program, and other key players were all in attendance. And at the heart of it all stood Elon Musk, who had already spoken with Jeff Bezos and other partners to ensure that SpaceX's plans were integrated into the broader vision for humanity's future in space. The venue was grand, a massive conference hall filled with diplomats, scientists, and industry leaders. The energy in the room was palpable, with everyone eager to hear what Elon Musk, the man who had turned space exploration into a thriving private enterprise, would say. As Elon stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. He could feel the eyes of the world on him. This was the moment, the chance to speak not just to the people in the room, but to every human being on Earth. Elon Musk, founder of SpaceX and Tesla, will now speak on the future of humanity in space, the moderator announced. The crowd erupted in applause, but Elon waited for the noise to subside before speaking. He took a deep breath, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "We've been dreaming of space for centuries," he began, his voice steady. "But now, we are standing on the edge of a new era. An era where space isn't just a destination, it's our future. And to achieve that future, we need more than just technology. We need unity." He paused, letting the word unity resonate in the room. "For too long, we've been divided by borders, by competition, by national interests. But the truth is, space doesn't care about borders. The stars don't recognize the divisions we've created. We are all in this together. And if we want to make life multiplanetary, if we want to build a future for humanity on Mars and beyond, we need to work together." Elon's voice grew more passionate as he continued. "This isn't about one company, one country, or one person. This is about the future of the human race. We're standing at a pivotal moment in history, and we can either continue down the path of division, or we can choose to unite and build a future that transcends our differences." The room was still, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Elon could see the impact of his speech taking hold. He could feel the collective energy in the room shift from skepticism to possibility. "Space is not a luxury," Elon continued. "It's a necessity. It's the next great frontier, and it is our responsibility to ensure that humanity survives and thrives beyond Earth. This is not about escapism, it's about survival. It's about securing a future for our children, for generations to come." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of the world's leaders. "Together, we can make this happen. Together, we can build the infrastructure, the technologies, and the partnerships needed to turn science fiction into science fact. And I believe, with all my heart, that humanity's future is in the stars." The room erupted into applause once more, but this time, it was different. It wasn't just polite clapping, it was the sound of a world waking up to the possibility of a new, unified future. The speech had been a resounding success. In the days that followed, media outlets across the globe covered Elon's words, and discussions about global space cooperation reached new heights. The world was beginning to understand what Elon had known all along: space was no longer just the domain of national governments or scientific elites. It was the collective responsibility of humanity. Behind the scenes, the efforts to create a global space alliance began to take shape. The UN summit had been just the beginning. New partnerships were formed, new agreements were signed, and the momentum for a collaborative future in space grew stronger by the day. But even as the world rallied behind his vision, Elon knew that the hardest work was still ahead. The stakes were higher than ever. He had just ignited the spark for something bigger than any of them could have imagined. Now, it was time to turn those dreams into reality. The days following Elon's speech at the UN summit felt like a whirlwind. Media coverage was overwhelming, with headlines proclaiming that humanity's path to the stars had just been reshaped. Leaders from around the globe were now united in their belief that space exploration was not only essential for the survival of humanity but also a critical opportunity for global cooperation. Elon, however, wasn't one to rest on his laurels. While the media buzzed and the world's leaders sent congratulatory messages, he knew that the real work was just beginning. Now that he had captured the world's attention, the task was to transform the vision into a concrete reality. There was a collective drive to make this dream of a united future in space happen, and Elon was at the forefront of making sure it did. SpaceX had already been involved in cutting-edge space technologies, but now, the scope of their mission was larger than ever. The collaboration with Blue Origin was progressing, but new players were entering the fold as well. Countries like India, Russia, and even smaller nations with burgeoning space programs began to reach out to Elon, expressing interest in joining the effort. The idea of a global space alliance was taking form, and it was more inclusive than anyone had anticipated. Elon spent countless hours on video calls, negotiating agreements, and strategizing with key stakeholders. He was no longer just leading a company, he was leading an entire movement. And he understood that with great power came great responsibility. One evening, as he was reviewing a new design for a Mars habitat, his phone rang again. It was Amelia, his trusted right hand and liaison for the international negotiations. "Elon," she said, her voice crackling slightly over the line, "there's something you need to see. There's a new player who wants to join the alliance, and it's unexpected." Elon raised an eyebrow. "Who is it?" "China," she replied, pausing for dramatic effect. "They've expressed interest in contributing both financially and technically to the Mars mission." Elon didn't react immediately. He had expected some resistance from China, but their interest in a partnership was a game-changer. His mind raced, processing the implications. A collaboration with China could accelerate their ambitions, but it also carried significant risks, especially given the geopolitical tensions that had long defined relations between China and the West. "That's big," Elon said finally. "What's the catch?" "They're requesting a meeting," Amelia replied. "And they want to discuss terms in person." The meeting with China's representative was set for the following week in Beijing. Elon was no stranger to high-stakes negotiations, but this would be a different kind of challenge. In order to push forward with the global space initiative, he knew that working with China was not only desirable, it was essential. The collaboration of nations and corporations was key to turning his vision into a reality, but that required trust and openness on both sides. As Elon boarded the private jet that would take him to Beijing, he reflected on just how far he had come in his mission. He had always been someone who was used to charting his own course, but now, he found himself navigating a complex web of politics, interests, and international relations. There were moments when he wondered if he had made a mistake by reaching out to so many different parties, but deep down, he knew that it was the only way forward. The meeting with the Chinese delegation took place in a sleek, glass-walled conference room in the heart of Beijing. The tension in the air was palpable, and Elon could feel the weight of the moment. The room was filled with government officials, engineers, and representatives from China's space agency, who all looked at him with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. The head of the delegation, Li Wei, was an imposing figure, known for his sharp mind and diplomatic savvy. He was also one of the key architects of China's ambitious space program. After some formalities, the discussion quickly shifted to the matter at hand, collaboration. "We believe that SpaceX has made incredible strides in space exploration," Elon, Li Wei began, his voice calm but firm. "But we also know that no one company can achieve this alone. For humanity to reach Mars and establish a permanent presence, we will need to work together. China is prepared to offer its full support, financial, technological, and logistical." Elon listened intently, already considering the possibilities. The partnership would allow SpaceX to accelerate its plans for Mars and offer new opportunities for China's space ambitions. But there was a lot on the line. With each word, he weighed the benefits and potential pitfalls. "We're talking about a generational project, one that could span decades," Elon said, his voice steady but serious. "And it's not just about sending humans to Mars, it's about building sustainable systems, technologies, and infrastructure. Can we guarantee that everyone involved has the same commitment to the long-term goal, not just short-term gains?" Li Wei nodded. We understand the gravity of this mission. China is committed to the vision of humanity's future in space, and we are prepared to play our part. As the meeting continued, Elon could sense the sincerity in the room. China's commitment to the future of space exploration was clear, and the terms of the partnership began to take shape. There would be challenges ahead, different political systems, competing priorities, and cultural differences to navigate, but Elon had always thrived in difficult environments. This was no different. By the end of the meeting, the foundation for a global partnership was laid. It was a monumental moment, one that would reshape not only the future of space exploration but the way nations cooperated on projects that transcended Earth's boundaries. Back in California, after his meeting with China, Elon gathered his SpaceX team for a briefing. The news of the partnership with China would send shockwaves throughout the space community, but there was no time to waste. Work needed to progress at an accelerated pace. We've taken a huge step forward, Elon told the team, his voice filled with resolve. But we're just getting started. We now have the backing of not just one nation but multiple nations. The future is in our hands. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But, he added, we have to be smart. We have to be cautious. This is about more than just rockets, it's about humanity's future. We can't afford to fail. Let's make sure we're ready for the challenge. The room was filled with energy. Elon's words resonated deeply within his team. They were no longer just engineers and scientists working on space projects, they were now part of something much larger. Something that could change the course of history. As the months unfolded, the vision that had begun as a dream was becoming a reality. SpaceX's collaborations were expanding, reaching across continents and industries. The focus was now clear, to build the infrastructure necessary for Mars, not just for exploration, but for sustainable human settlement. Every new agreement, every new partnership, was another step toward achieving that goal. Elon's mind, however, remained focused on the long term. The real test would come when the first human footsteps were set on Mars. It was a daunting prospect, but with the world now united in a shared vision, there was hope that humanity's greatest leap would soon be within reach. And with that hope came a renewed sense of purpose, a reminder that the path to the stars was not just a journey of rockets and technology, but a journey of unity. As the partnership between SpaceX and international space agencies solidified, the pace of progress began to accelerate. New spacecraft designs, advanced propulsion systems, and Mars habitat blueprints were being developed at an unprecedented rate. Yet, as momentum built, so did the challenges, technical, political, and personal. Elon had always thrived under pressure, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The world was watching, waiting for the next big breakthrough. And while he'd managed to unite nations under a single vision, he was beginning to see just how difficult it would be to turn that vision into a reality. It was an early morning when Elon found himself at the SpaceX headquarters, poring over the latest calculations for the Starship prototype. The spacecraft, which would eventually carry humans to Mars, had been progressing in leaps and bounds, but recent tests revealed issues with the fuel efficiency of the new Raptor engines, an obstacle they hadn't anticipated. Frustration simmered beneath Elon's calm exterior. He knew that failure was part of the process, but the constant pressure to succeed was something else entirely. If the Starship didn't perform as expected, not only would the Mars mission be delayed, but the entire global space partnership could be jeopardized. Failure wasn't an option. Elon glanced up at the clock. It was time to meet with his chief engineer, Sarah Hayes, who had been leading the propulsion team for the Starship project. As she entered his office, Elon stood and motioned for her to sit. "What's the latest?" he asked, his voice tight. Sarah sighed and ran a hand through her hair, her eyes filled with concern. "We've isolated the issue. The fuel mixture's not performing at the efficiency we thought it would. We need more testing and recalibration, but that's going to push the next launch window back by months." Elon's eyes narrowed. "I don't have months, Sarah. We've committed to a timeline. The world is waiting for us to succeed." What are our options? Sarah's expression softened. I'm not saying it's hopeless. It's fixable. We just need to work through this hurdle, but we'll have to move fast. We'll have to burn the midnight oil. Elon paced the room, processing the information. He knew Sarah was one of the best engineers in the world. If anyone could solve the problem, it was her. But he also knew the immense pressure they were under. You're right, Elon said finally, stopping in his tracks. We'll work through it. I'll push the team harder if I have to. This is too important. But we also need to keep the broader mission in mind. The partnerships, the global momentum, it can't stall. We need to keep pushing forward on all fronts. As Sarah left his office to oversee the team's next steps, Elon took a moment to collect his thoughts. The technical hurdles were one thing, but the political landscape was another challenge entirely. Since the UN summit, tensions had begun to rise between some of the international partners. While most countries had embraced the idea of a global space alliance, others were hesitant, fearing that such a vast project would be dominated by a single entity. Elon knew that diplomacy was now as much a part of his job as engineering. That afternoon, he was scheduled to meet with Sergei Ivanov, Russia's chief space diplomat. Sergei was a sharp and seasoned negotiator, known for his ability to cut through bureaucracy and get things done. But, like many of the leaders Elon had encountered, Sergei had a strong sense of national pride and wasn't keen on ceding control to multinational coalitions. The meeting took place in a sleek, high-tech conference room at SpaceX headquarters. Sergei entered, accompanied by a few advisors, his demeanor formal yet curious. Mr. Musk, Sergei said with a slight nod, taking a seat. I've been following your progress closely. Your vision is impressive, but I must admit, I have concerns. Elon leaned back in his chair, adopting his characteristic calm. I'm listening, Sergei. What concerns you? It's not the vision itself, Sergei said, his voice steady but firm. It's the execution. You've done a fantastic job with SpaceX, but the reality of a global space mission is much more complex. My government is asking if you're truly prepared for the political challenges. How will we handle competing interests, differing priorities? What about the distribution of resources? You can't possibly expect all nations to simply follow your lead. Elon took a deep breath, knowing this conversation was coming. He'd been preparing for it for weeks, but now the time had come to confront the reality of leading a global coalition. I understand your concerns, Elon began. But this isn't about one country leading over others. It's about pooling our resources, our technologies, our knowledge, to achieve a common goal. We're talking about the future of humanity. If we can't put aside our differences and work together, we risk losing everything. Sergei stared at him for a long moment, his gaze unwavering. Finally, he spoke. Perhaps, he said, his tone softening just a little. But we need assurances. Russia will not simply be a passenger in this journey. We will need a clear role, a leadership position in certain aspects of the project. Elon nodded, understanding the underlying message. Of course. Everyone has to have a seat at the table. I'm not looking to dictate terms, I'm looking for collaboration. We'll make sure that all voices are heard. But the bottom line is this, we have to move forward together, or we'll never make it to Mars. Sergei regarded him for a moment longer, then offered a thin smile. Very well. We will continue the discussions. But be prepared, Mr. Musk. This will not be easy. As Sergei departed, Elon felt the weight of the challenge settle back into his chest. The political landscape of space exploration was far from simple. The Global Space Alliance was a massive undertaking, and the delicate balance of collaboration and competition would define its success. Later that evening, Elon stood on the balcony of his office, looking out over the SpaceX campus. The stars above seemed distant, yet closer than ever. The work they were doing could change everything. But it would take more than rockets and fuel. It would take trust, diplomacy, and the collective will of every nation involved. As he looked up, he couldn't help but think of the journey ahead. It was going to be long, filled with obstacles and setbacks, but it was a journey worth taking. And as difficult as the road was, Elon was more determined than ever to see it through. The phone buzzed in his pocket. It was Amelia, his ever-reliable partner in the global negotiations. She'd been keeping tabs on the political side of things, ensuring the international efforts didn't stall. "Elon," she said when he picked up, "we're good with China, they're on board. And we've got a breakthrough with India. But Russia's still a tough nut to crack." Elon's expression hardened, but he didn't let it show. "We'll keep pushing. We have no choice." After a pause, Amelia added, "You're pulling the world together, Elon. They may not realize it yet, but you're creating something none of us have ever seen before. And I believe we're getting closer." Elon took a deep breath, looking once again at the sky above. The journey was only beginning, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of something more, a vision not just for space, but for humanity. The months following Elon's meeting with Sergey were some of the most intense in his career. The global space coalition was slowly taking shape, but the complexity of the endeavor was immense. Tensions between the international partners were high, and every decision seemed to carry immense weight. Yet, despite the challenges, there was something undeniable about the momentum. Every day brought them closer to their shared goal, to make humanity an interplanetary species. Elon had always believed that the path to Mars was a path of collaboration, but that didn't make the journey any easier. Behind the scenes, there were endless meetings, negotiations, and compromises. Countries with differing priorities were finding it hard to align their agendas, but Elon remained focused on the bigger picture. Every sacrifice, every concession, was worth it. The world was waiting for their next big step. Everyone was focused on Starship's first fully operational flight to orbit. This was to be the launch that would signal to the world that the Mars mission was no longer a distant dream, but a tangible reality. The day of the launch arrived, and Elon found himself standing on the balcony of the SpaceX Mission Control Center, gazing out at the giant Starship sitting on the launch pad. The craft was a marvel of engineering, standing tall with its gleaming metallic surface reflecting the California sun. It was the culmination of years of hard work and sacrifice. But even as the countdown clock ticked down, Elon couldn't shake the weight of the moment. This launch wasn't just about Starship reaching orbit, it was about proving that humanity could overcome its divisions, unite, and reach the stars. If this mission failed, it could set back the entire global space initiative by years, if not decades. Beside him stood Gwynne Shotwell, SpaceX's president, and Bob Smith, the head of their launch operations. The atmosphere in the room was tense, filled with an almost tangible energy. Every team member, from engineers to ground controllers, was on edge. "Elon," Gwynne said, her voice steady but filled with emotion, "we've done everything we can. It's time." He nodded, but the gravity of the situation weighed heavily on him. This was more than just a test flight, it was the test of a new era. He knew the eyes of the world were on them. Governments, businesses, scientists, even children, everyone who had dreamed of exploring space was now waiting for this moment. "Elon," Bob added, his gaze fixed on the monitors. "It's all systems go. Just waiting for your call." Elon took a deep breath, pushing aside any lingering doubts. The world had come this far, and they were not about to back down now. "Do it," he said, his voice firm and clear. The countdown reached 0. Starship's engines ignited with a deafening roar, and the massive rocket began its climb into the sky. Elon's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the craft ascend, cutting through the atmosphere with unimaginable power. The sheer force of the launch shook the ground beneath him, but it was the sight of the rocket breaking free of Earth's gravity that brought a tear to his eye. As Starship streaked toward the heavens, Elon allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. This was what he had always dreamed of. It wasn't just about technology or engineering, it was about human will, about reaching for something greater than ourselves. But the journey was far from over. As the rocket reached its designated orbit and the engineers began to assess the data, it became clear that Starship was performing flawlessly. The team erupted into cheers, but Elon didn't allow himself to join in the celebration. There was still work to be done. The Mars mission was still years away, and the political negotiations were far from over. That evening, after the launch had been declared a success, Elon sat alone in his office, staring out at the stars. The weight of the day had not yet left him, and despite the success, a part of him was still restless. There was so much more to be done. He picked up his phone and dialed Amelia. She had been integral in organizing the political side of things, ensuring that the Global Space Alliance was moving forward without disruption. "Elon," she said, answering immediately. "What's on your mind?" He leaned back in his chair, rubbing his eyes. The launch was a success. But it's not enough. We're at a tipping point. I can feel it. The eyes of the world are on us now more than ever. "You've already accomplished so much," Amelia said, her voice reassuring. "But I know what you mean. This is just the beginning. The real work starts now." "I'm thinking about the political hurdles," Elon said, exhaling sharply. "We have momentum, but there are still countries that are hesitant, not to mention the factions within each government. Russia, China, India, they all want their piece of the pie. We can't afford to let these tensions derail us." "I've been speaking with the international leaders," Amelia replied. "And while the concerns are there, they know this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. I think we're closer than ever to solidifying the global commitment. The real test will be when we start building the infrastructure on Mars itself. That's when the true strength of the alliance will be tested." Elon nodded, feeling the weight of the conversation. "I'm counting on you to keep them focused. We need to keep pushing forward, even if it means making tough decisions. We can't afford to slow down now." "I'll do everything I can," Amelia said. "But remember, you're not alone in this. We're all in this together." The next few weeks were a blur of meetings, calls, and updates. The Space Alliance was growing stronger by the day, but there were still significant challenges ahead. The logistics of a Mars mission, transport, habitat construction, life support systems, were all areas where the team would have to innovate in ways that had never been done before. Elon also continued to focus on the technical side of things. The Starship was scheduled for another test flight, this time with a crew on board. The pressure was building, but he knew that success was within reach. One afternoon, as he sat reviewing a new series of designs for the Mars base, there was a knock on his office door. It was Gwyn Shotwell, holding a tablet in her hand. "Elon," she said, her voice calm but serious, "we've received some troubling news. There's been a breakthrough in propulsion technology, something that could revolutionize our approach. But it's not from one of our partners. It's from a private firm, a competitor." Elon frowned, standing up to take a look at the tablet. The news was both exciting and unnerving. Another player was entering the game, one that had the potential to disrupt the carefully crafted plans of the Global Alliance. "Is it a threat?" Elon asked. "Not necessarily," Gwyn replied. "But it changes the dynamics. We'll need to stay ahead of this, or risk losing the lead." Elon stood still for a moment, contemplating the challenge ahead. For a moment, the weight of the task ahead felt overwhelming. But then, as he often did, he reminded himself of the bigger picture. "We'll adapt," Elon said, determination setting in. "We always do." The breakthrough in propulsion technology had sent shockwaves through the aerospace community, and Elon knew that SpaceX had to respond. The private firm that had made the discovery was not well known outside of certain circles, but they had just introduced a new method for interplanetary travel, a revolutionary propulsion system that promised to cut travel time to Mars by half. The news was both thrilling and terrifying. For months, Elon had been working to develop SpaceX's own advanced propulsion systems, but this new technology changed everything. It was clear that the race to Mars had just gotten a whole lot more competitive. It was late in the evening when Elon gathered his core team, Gwyn, Bob Smith, and a handful of senior engineers and scientists, in the war room at SpaceX headquarters. The room was filled with tension, the mood far from celebratory despite the remarkable achievements they had made over the past few months. "Let's get to the point," Elon said, his voice cutting through the silence. "We've got competition. This new propulsion system could change the entire game. If they perfect it, they could put us at a disadvantage. We need a plan, and we need it fast." Bob was the first to speak. "Elon, we've been hearing rumors about this company for a while. They've been testing something, but we didn't know it was this advanced. The technology is sound, but we still don't know if it can scale or if it can survive long-term testing." Gwyn looked grim. "But that doesn't change the fact that they've made significant progress. Our investors, our partners, everyone is going to be watching. They won't wait forever." Elon nodded, his mind already racing through the possibilities. This wasn't the first time they'd faced a challenge, but this one felt different. The stakes were higher than ever. Mars wasn't just a goal anymore, it was becoming a matter of international prestige, corporate dominance, and technological superiority. "We can't afford to be reactionary," Elon said, pacing around the room. "We need to accelerate our plans. Double down on our research, on our testing. If we need to make new breakthroughs, we do it. And we do it fast." The room fell silent, the weight of Elon's words hanging in the air. Finally, Bob spoke again. "We can push forward on the Starship and refine the Raptor engines. But we might need to reassess the timeline. If we keep pushing too hard without adequate testing, we risk a major failure." "I don't care about the timeline," Elon said bluntly. "We will not fall behind. This is bigger than us. This is about humanity's future. If we let someone else steal the march on us, we'll lose more than just the race to Mars. We'll lose everything we've worked for." The team exchanged looks of agreement. They had all seen Elon in this mode before, focused, relentless, and unyielding in the pursuit of his vision. They knew that when he set his mind to something, nothing would stand in his way. "We'll set up an emergency team," Gwyn said, her voice steady. "Bring in the best minds we have. We'll get ahead of this. We'll figure it out." Elon stopped pacing and looked at each of them. "Good. Let's make sure we're the ones driving this industry forward, not just following in someone else's wake." The next few days were a blur. SpaceX's engineers and scientists worked around the clock to test new designs, tweak existing propulsion systems, and analyze every aspect of the rival company's technology. Elon himself was deeply involved, meeting with experts from various fields and pushing the boundaries of what they thought was possible. But despite the intense pressure, Elon remained calm, focused. His usual level of determination was now coupled with an understanding of the bigger picture. This was not just about competition, it was about leading humanity into a new era. And he wasn't going to let anyone stand in the way of that. Meanwhile, across the globe, the International Space Coalition continued to move forward. The countries involved had pledged their support for the Mars mission, but as always, there were challenges behind the scenes. There were disagreements over the distribution of resources, concerns about the timeline, and debates about who would lead certain aspects of the mission. Elon spent hours in meetings, navigating the complex web of politics that came with a project of this magnitude. But he knew that in the end, the technical side of things would determine their success. If they couldn't get the spacecraft to Mars, nothing else would matter. One evening, as he sat in his office reviewing new test data for the Starship's next flight, Elon's phone buzzed. It was an encrypted message from Amelia, the political strategist who had been instrumental in keeping the global coalition together. "Big news," the message read. "Russia's gone silent. There's a new government initiative to pursue their own Mars mission, without our involvement. We've got to act fast." Elon's stomach tightened. The international cooperation that had taken so long to establish was now teetering on the edge of collapse. If Russia, one of the most influential members of the coalition, backed out, it could set the entire project back by years. He immediately dialed Amelia. "Elon," she said when she picked up, her voice laced with urgency. "We need to engage. Russia is making moves, and it's not just about the Mars mission, it's about control over space. If they pull out now, they'll have to justify it to the rest of the world. And that could lead to a domino effect." "I know," Elon said, his mind working quickly. "We've built something too important to let it fall apart now. What's our play? We need to show them we're committed to collaboration. We need to offer them more control, more influence over the mission. But we can't just offer them empty promises. We need something tangible." Elon thought for a moment. "I'll personally reach out to Sergey. Let's set up a meeting. We'll offer them a significant role, one that puts them at the forefront of the Mars infrastructure development." Amelia agreed. "I'll coordinate with the team. Let me know when you're ready." The next day, Elon boarded a private jet to Moscow, determined to keep the alliance intact. As he sat in his seat, gazing out the window at the clouds below, he couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. The world was at a crossroads. The future of space exploration, the future of humanity, was hanging in the balance. He knew that one wrong move could derail everything. But he was ready. For him, there was no turning back. Moscow. The cold air bit at Elon's skin as he stepped off the jet. The city had a palpable weight to it, a sense of history and power that could almost be felt in the air. He'd been to Russia several times before, but today felt different. Today, he wasn't just here as a businessman, he was here as a key player in something much bigger. The fate of humanity's future in space could very well hinge on the decisions made in the next few hours. Sergey Brin, the co-founder of Google and now a vital partner in the Space Coalition, had pulled a few strings to set up the meeting with the Russian government. He had promised to smooth over the political hurdles, but Elon knew this meeting wasn't going to be simple. If Russia had truly decided to go their own way, the ramifications could be enormous. The Kremlin loomed ahead, its grand, imposing structure a symbol of the political power that resided here. As Elon entered the building, flanked by a small entourage of his closest advisors, he felt a familiar sense of pressure. This wasn't just about SpaceX or the Mars mission, it was about geopolitics, alliances, and the future of space exploration. It was about survival, and Elon wasn't about to let his dream of interplanetary colonization slip away due to political wrangling. He was led down a long hallway into a room where Dmitry Petrov, Russia's Minister of Space Exploration, was waiting. A tall, imposing man in his late 50s, Petrov exuded an air of authority that immediately made the room feel smaller. "Elon Musk," Petrov said, his voice deep, barely a hint of emotion in his tone. "I've heard much about you. Your ambition. Your vision. But tell me, is your vision big enough to accommodate us?" Elon didn't hesitate. "Absolutely. The mission to Mars, and beyond, is bigger than any one country. The key is collaboration. We've proven that when we work together, we can achieve the impossible. But I won't lie to you, Dmitry. The future of the Space Coalition depends on our unity." Petrov raised an eyebrow, then gestured for Elon to sit. As Elon took a seat across from him, the Russian minister leaned forward slightly, studying him intently. "We are already on a path to our own space goals, Musk. We have the resources, the expertise, and the drive to go it alone. Why should we remain tethered to a project that will be run by the likes of you?" Elon could feel the tension thickening. Russia was serious about going solo, and Petrov's words were laced with an unspoken challenge. He could see it now, their pride, their desire for independence, and the need to assert their dominance on the world stage. "The simple answer is this," Elon said, his voice calm but unwavering. "If we go it alone, none of us will ever reach Mars. The time and cost to achieve something of this magnitude are too great. It's the reason why I'm here today. We need each other. But I'm willing to give Russia a pivotal role in the mission. We're at a tipping point. We have to decide if we're going to lead together or if we're going to let our egos tear us apart. There was a long pause as Petrov studied him, clearly considering the offer. The silence stretched out, and for a moment, Elon wasn't sure if it would work. Finally, Petrov broke the silence. What exactly do you propose, Musk? Elon leaned forward slightly, locking eyes with Petrov. I propose that Russia takes the lead on building the critical infrastructure on Mars, the habitats, the power systems, the bases. You'll have full control over that segment of the mission. It will be your expertise that establishes humanity's first permanent presence on another planet. In return, SpaceX will handle the transportation systems, the spacecraft, and the technology that will bring us to Mars. Petrov's expression remained unreadable, but his mind was clearly working through the details. This was a significant offer, one that would put Russia at the forefront of one of the most important aspects of the Mars mission. It was a huge bargaining chip, but it wasn't without risk. Giving Russia such control was a bold move, but Elon understood that it was the only way to keep them from pulling out of the coalition. Interesting, Petrov said slowly, clearly weighing the offer. You're offering us leadership, not just partnership. That's right, Elon replied, maintaining eye contact. We'll work together, but you will have the lead role in shaping the future of humanity on Mars. Your contribution will be the foundation of the entire mission. Petrov stood, walking to the window and staring out at the Moscow skyline. Elon remained silent, knowing that sometimes, a pause was as powerful as any argument. After what seemed like an eternity, Petrov turned around and fixed his gaze on Elon once more. You are a bold man, Elon Musk. Perhaps too bold for your own good. But your offer is compelling. If we agree to this partnership, it will not be just a footnote in history. It will be the defining moment of our civilization. Elon stood as well, feeling a sense of quiet resolve. We're all in this together. History won't remember the small squabbles. It will remember the ones who took the biggest leap for mankind. Petrov extended his hand. Very well, Musk. We have an agreement. Russia will lead the Mars infrastructure project. Elon shook his hand firmly. Thank you, Dmitry. Together, we will make history. The following weeks were a whirlwind of diplomatic maneuvering, press releases, and public statements. The partnership between SpaceX and Russia was formalized, and the space coalition seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The tension that had been hanging in the air for months began to dissipate. But while the political landscape seemed to stabilize, the technical challenges of the Mars mission were only just beginning. Elon knew that this was a fragile moment, one misstep could send everything crashing down. He had to keep the momentum going, and that meant continuing to push the boundaries of technology. The new propulsion system from the rival company still loomed large, and the pressure was mounting. If SpaceX didn't act quickly, they could find themselves left behind. In the quiet of his office late one night, Elon stared at the stars through his window. The journey to Mars was just beginning, but the road ahead would be anything but easy. He had made alliances, earned trust, and secured a place for humanity's future among the stars. But it wasn't enough. Not yet. One thing was certain, he wasn't going to let anything stand in the way of the dream that had fueled him for so long. The next step was already in motion, and the journey was far from over. The day of the first interplanetary mission launch was finally here. Elon stood in a control room at SpaceX headquarters, surrounded by a team of engineers, scientists, and aerospace experts. The room was filled with an atmosphere of tense anticipation, but also excitement. This was it, the culmination of years of hard work, setbacks, and breakthroughs. The Mars mission, once a distant dream, was now within reach. SpaceX had finally done it. They had developed the new, advanced propulsion system that was far superior to anything else currently available, and they had been working around the clock to get Starship ready for its maiden interplanetary flight. The combined resources of SpaceX, Russia, and the other global partners had laid the groundwork for this historic moment. Elon stood near the large windows overlooking the launch pad, where the towering Starship rocket sat, gleaming in the early morning light. It seemed almost too perfect, standing there in the calm before the storm. But Elon knew better. He had spent years building up to this moment, but the truth was, the hardest part was still to come. The countdown had begun, but there was no turning back now. "Are you ready?" Gwyn shot him a look, her voice a mix of determination and reassurance. "I was born ready," Elon replied with a small grin, though his eyes were fixed on the rocket. Gwyn smirked. "You've been saying that since we started this project." Elon didn't respond immediately. His thoughts were somewhere else, on the years that had led to this day, on the countless late nights, the tireless work from so many brilliant minds, and on the countless risks they'd taken to get here. He had always believed in the mission, but today, as the rocket sat on the launch pad, he felt an unshakable certainty that this was the moment that could change the course of human history forever. The goal had always been bigger than just Mars. This was about proving to the world that humanity could reach beyond Earth, that they had the will, the ingenuity, and the courage to survive and thrive in the cosmos. But there were still risks. There always would be. No matter how much data they had, no matter how many simulations they ran, the reality of space travel remained unpredictable. They were pushing the boundaries of technology, testing the limits of what was possible. It was, and would always be, a high-stakes gamble. As the countdown clock ticked down, the room fell silent. The engineers double-checked everything, ensuring that the systems were all in working order. Elon's eyes were locked on the screen, watching as the numbers got closer and closer to 0. 10, 9, the voice on the intercom rang out. Gwyn looked at Elon, her gaze steady. "We've come a long way, Elon. And I know you've been through a lot to get us here. But this moment? This is for humanity. No matter what happens next." Elon nodded, his gaze never wavering from the screen. He was nervous, yes, but it was a controlled nervousness, the kind that comes from knowing that you've done everything you can to prepare. Now it was out of his hands. 5, 4, 3. The ground beneath their feet trembled as the engines roared to life. The intense heat and force from the rocket's engines blasted outwards, creating a wall of flame that momentarily lit up the sky. Then, slowly but powerfully, the Starship began its ascent into the atmosphere. Elon's heart raced as the rocket soared upward. The reality of the situation finally hit him. This was it. The ship was on its way to Mars. SpaceX was no longer just a private company in California, it was the company that had taken humanity's first real step toward becoming a multiplanetary species. Minutes passed, and then hours. Elon watched the mission's progress on a series of monitors. The rocket had entered space, and now it was on course for Mars. The hard part was done. All that remained was the journey itself. They had proven they could reach Mars, and soon, they would prove they could land safely. The next few days were filled with intense anticipation, but the ground crew at SpaceX had done their job. The system was flawless. Their calculations were precise. There was nothing left to do but wait and hope. The mission reached its final destination, Mars, days later. The first Starship successfully landed on the red planet, a soft thud reverberating across the desolate landscape. For the first time in history, human-made technology had touched down on Mars, and humanity had taken its first tangible step toward becoming an interplanetary species. Elon watched the live feed in the control room, his eyes fixed on the grainy footage as the landing pod deployed, and the small rover began its first steps on the Martian soil. It was a moment of awe, a moment that marked the beginning of a new era. Later that evening, as Elon walked outside to get some fresh air, he couldn't help but feel a deep sense of accomplishment. The world had watched as SpaceX had made history, but there was still so much left to do. There were more rockets to launch, more systems to perfect, and more challenges to overcome. Yet, for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to reflect on how far they had come. When he had first set out to revolutionize space travel, there had been so many people who doubted him. Many had believed his vision was too ambitious, too far-fetched. But today, those doubts had been silenced. Elon turned his gaze to the stars above him, feeling a profound sense of connection to the universe. He wasn't just looking at the sky anymore, he was looking at the future. Mission accomplished, he whispered to himself. But even as the words left his lips, he knew that this was just the beginning. The true work had yet to come. Mars had been reached, but now they had to build a sustainable presence. They had to find a way to make life on Mars not just possible, but thriving. And beyond Mars, the entire solar system awaited. Elon smiled to himself, the familiar fire of determination burning within him once more. It wasn't over. It was only just starting. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?